Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you our first read of The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. And just for full clarity, this is an advanced reader copy that we've received.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, you should be able to buy the book at, I would assume, most of your major bookstores.
Definitely. It's out as a physical copy, it's out as an ebook, as well as audiobook.
Yep. But before we go into that, as I was reading this, I was not expecting this to be as dark as it was, but it makes sense. I mean, the title is The Storm We Made.
Right.
If you see the cover, it's very blurry, dark, like there's a lot of darkness within it.
Mm-hmm.
And even just reading the back page, it doesn't sound like a happy story.
No.
I think that on top of the current world situations, and I keep finding myself going down negative rabbit holes on like hunger within different countries and the needs of different people that aren't being met, and then I keep finding myself going down really dark rabbit holes.
For sure, like the fall of empires and the different genocides that are happening around the world.
And the different colonizations that are still happening, both within the U.S., but also like places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, things like that.
Yeah.
So it's like a huge bummer, which isn't the best place to mindfully read a lot of dark stories. So what I kind of wanted to talk about was, how do you find ways to break out of that darkness? Or how do you find ways to cope with reading stories like this?
Definitely. Or in addition to coping, balancing personal emotions as well as the emotions that are happening in the book.
Right, because these stories are important. Like,
yes,
I did not
absolutely.
know Malaysia was Malaya. The story from Pachinko, which is about Japanese occupation in Korea. The story of A Tiny Upward Shove, which was very dark, but so well told. It's not that we should not read these books, but I just think we definitely need to, like you said, balance out our emotions with what we're reading.
For sure. When I'm reading heavy books like this one, the biggest thing for me is to allow myself to take a break when I need a breather. And that could be just closing the book for a second and staring off into space and reminding myself that it's okay to give myself that moment, and I don't have to brush through whatever emotions I'm feeling. I don't have to rush through whatever part of the story that I've encountered. I can just let myself think.
I feel like I have almost the exact opposite method for it. Is that once it gets really bad, like in this book, there's a chapter where something very bad happens at the end of the chapter.
Right.
And I was like, this is the ending point. And the way these chapters are written is that they have new starting points for pretty much every chapter, so far at least. So in my mind, I was just thinking like, okay, I'll just get through this and let's read on to the next one, because the next part probably isn't a continuation of the same negative thing that just happened that I just read. But yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to go. In the case of this book, it's kind of like stacking on different traumas on top of each other. I think what I do is eventually do take a break, though. I do take a break from the reading, and I'll do things that I like I like shopping, and so I've heard this term that one of my friends use, which is called window shopping online. So this is where you go online and you're like clicking through different things, adding it to the cart, and just leaving it there and not actually purchasing the items.
Definitely. So shopping therapy.
Yeah, that, or I'll watch like YouTube or a show that I'm very familiar with, something I've watched in the past and really enjoy. So it kind of is able to de-stress my brain a little bit.
For sure. So finding something joyful to combat the negative feelings.
Right.
I do something similar in that if I'm not taking a thinking break, I would stop and do a chore, because that would make my mind focus on something different for a short period of time.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that I tend to do is find humor in different things. So whether it's changing to a different book, whether it's a comic, whether listening to a stand-up, doing something where it almost forcefully makes you laugh is always good, whether it's physical comedy, whether it's humor within jokes. You can scroll through Instagram if you have a pretty positive feed or some kind of social media. But if your social media is filled with current wartime things, I probably wouldn't recommend going through that right after reading this book.
Right.
But I mean, whatever it is, whether it's lighting a candle, lighting incense, just sitting in darkness, taking a shower. There are all these methods to kind of cope. We've provided different recommendations in the past for people that might help if you really find yourself in a little bit darker place from the reads.
Right, and there's also professional help. Like, if you find yourself spiraling right after reading, definitely give yourself a break, but also seek out professional help through your therapist, if you have one, or through hotlines that are available for everyone, especially in the United States.
Yeah, and, you also don't have to finish the book. If something's too dark, no matter how good a read is, if it doesn't suit you, maybe even at the moment, just don't worry about finishing it. It's not something that's major. You can always come back to it at another time. I don't think there's any read that's worth the sacrifice of your mental health. But along with that, if you are looking for something new to see or something fun to kind of look at, that's going to be our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Mona Chalabi. Mona Chalabi is an award-winning writer and illustrator. What she does is she rehumanizes data so we can understand the world and how we live in it. You might have seen her work in the Netflix show The Fix, or you might have seen some of her illustrated data graphs on Instagram, or you might have come across one of her pieces in the New York Magazine, The Guardian, or other publications. And what I appreciate most about Mona Chalabi is that she makes data points easy to understand and in a way that is full of integrity. So, for example, with the struggle in Gaza right now, in one of her graphs, she's shown how many people were displaced in the Nakba in 1948 and how many people are currently displaced in this current Nakba in 2023-2024. You can learn more about her work via Instagram at Mona Chalabi, that's MONACHALABI, or through her website at monachalabi.com.
And that's our recommendation for the week. Okay, so we're on our first read of The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. In this read, we've read pages 1 through 82 on our physical copy, or for everyone, we read chapters 1 through 6.
In these chapters, as a content warning, there are mentions of sexual assault and child abuse. So if you haven't read it yet, please take care while reading. And if you have read, I hope that you've found ways to take care of yourself.
So let's get into the book. The book is written in a way that each chapter focuses on one character's perspective. So we are following the Alcantara family, and we are mainly following 4 of them, which is what is told at least from the back of the book. The mother, who seems to be one of the big headstone characters of this story, is Cecily.
Yes.
We have her husband, who's Gordon, who is seemingly more of a background character in all this. He doesn't seem to get his perspective told.
He seems to be more of a supporting character for sure.
Right. We also then have Jujube, who is the oldest daughter and the oldest of the 3 kids.
Yes.
We have Abel, who's the second child, the middle child.
And the only son.
Yep. And then we have Jasmin, who's the youngest child, who seemingly is around 10 or 9, I think.
I think
very
so.
Young kid.
She's the youngest, so probably elementary age.
Right. So Cecily seems to take on the biggest role of the beginning of the story. So we'll save her story for last, even though she has different parts sparsed out within this read. But let's kind of start in maybe a dark place, but let's start with Abel.
Yes, Abel is 15 years old, and right after his birthday, he gets kidnapped.
Right.
And we are introduced to Abel's character's point of view 6 months after this kidnapping, where we find that he's in a chicken coop because he disrespected Master Akiro.
Right. And so this is where a lot of his story takes place in terms of what we're looking at in the present.
Right.
But there are glimpses into the past of how he gets here in the first place.
Yes.
Which is his relationship with Brother Luke, who was a past British teacher that he had at some point when he was a kid.
When the British occupation was still happening.
Yeah, and I still don't understand why he was captured. Like, I don't know why Brother Luke turned him in. I don't know if it was for money. We know that Brother Luke was beaten up by the Japanese soldiers that, eventually took in Abel. But there was no real actual story of why they wanted Abel captured or why Brother Luke even decided to help.
I think Brother Luke mentioned that if he didn't capture Abel, then he's going to be sent back into prison. And so that's Brother Luke's motive. I don't know exactly what the Japanese soldiers' motives were, but what we know from Cecily's story, and we'll get more into her story later, but what we know from her side of the story is that they started off taking the troublemakers, and once they no longer had troublemakers to take, they started taking the smart ones or the kind ones.
Right. So within this concentration camp that Abel is set into, he finds himself getting into trouble, and that's where towards the end of the chapter we have a telling of the sexual assault that happens within that prison or that jail cell, whatever you want to call it, the chicken coop.
The chicken coop, unfortunately.
Right. That's all we really know about Abel at this point.
Yes.
We hear glimpses of how he was as a son throughout the story between the viewpoints of Jujube, Jasmin, and Cecily.
Yes.
But with that said, let's go on to Jujube's story, because that's a little bit more lighthearted, but also dark, kind of a balance between both.
Right. Jujube is the eldest, and with Jujube, she's been working at this tea house that serves Japanese soldiers for the most part.
Right.
And one of her regulars is this teacher named Mr. Takahashi. And with Mr. Takahashi, she kind of worries about what this relationship is like, because Mr. Takahashi gives Jujube all these gifts. He gives her rations, he gives her books, he gives her these little trinkets. And the dark side is that Jujube wonders what he wants in return.
And he just seems like a very sweet old man.
And I think his motive that is revealed to us later is the fact that she reminds him of his daughter.
Right, and from the beginning of the chapter, it's his daughter who he's concerned might have been hurt from the bombing of the U.S. on Japan.
Yes.
I can't remember which one it was.
Specifically Nagasaki.
It was Nagasaki. And towards the end of the chapters, we find out that it's now Mr. Takahashi being reminded of his now deceased daughter within the looks and behaviors of Jujube.
Right, but Mr. Takahashi isn't sure that his daughter is deceased.
He's not, but the description of it makes it sound like it's pretty definitive from the mushy crown. Like, we don't know for sure.
Right.
There's no body, but from the way that they've described the terror and how much destruction was there,
right,
at least a general insinuation that seems to be present is that his daughter has passed away, and he's shed tears at least for that fact.
Yes.
So what we see within the relationship of Jujube and Mr. Takahashi is that Jujube finds herself in different scenarios that she ends up helping Mr. Takahashi, such as like serving him tea, but also like giving him little bits extra here and there.
Also, whenever he's writing letters, especially in English, she helps him make it clearer.
Right. She is able to fully translate his thoughts, not just what he's trying to say.
Right.
And along with that, Mr. Takahashi, on the other hand, then is helping her out through different means.
Right.
One of the biggest ones being towards the end, where these Japanese patrons have gotten way too wasted at the tea house. And so Jujube's boss is leaving her at the tea house to finish cleaning up and closing. But the issue is that the curfew is just right on the border.
Right. And in order to help her, Mr. Takahashi comes in and picks up a mop, even though Jujube is worried and not wanting him to do that.
Right, because he's also a patron. Like, he shouldn't be going through this.
Exactly.
The other big help is actually on the journey home.
Right.
And so, as Jujube is walking home, Mr. Takahashi insists that he accompanies her on this travel.
Right.
And ends up being her lifeline when she gets pulled over by a soldier.
Right, at a checkpoint.
Right. We see that there is a blooming relationship between these two. We also know through a future story, which is Jasmin's, that the family knows about Mr. Takahashi and knows how sweet and caring he is, at least to Jujube.
Right.
So I feel like he's going to be a character that is at least incorporated into the story within Jujube's life.
For sure. So that brings us to the youngest, Jasmin.
Right.
Because Jasmin is the youngest, and because the soldiers continue to search the Alcantara home, the parents, Cecily and Gordon, are worried. They don't want another child to be lost.
Right.
They don't want their child to be taken away.
Right.
So Jasmin has been sentenced to hiding under the basement to prevent her from being taken or abused like the other children.
Right, and I think we see more of that perspective from Cecily's viewpoint, from one of her stories. What we see from Jasmine's viewpoint is a very innocent look at what this world looks like.
Right.
I think that was a reprieve from some of the other reads that we have, because Jasmine's story very much is more dealing around her relationship with her newfound friend, which also gets really dark, but it's more of this playful relationship of how do I have fun when I'm trapped in this basement for at least 8-9 hours a day, it sounds like.
It might be 12.
Right.
Because if curfew is at 8, that means the soldiers are not looking at homes anymore after 8.
Right.
So who knows when they start their searches, and who knows when Jasmin is sentenced into the basement.
Right.
Although her mom Cecily does give her food and eats with her, those are very small moments.
I think they're giving her what they can, but they're too afraid of her being caught.
Exactly.
There are moments in this that you do see the love within the family, just like what Cecily does. You also see that Gordon, who's the father, he makes these little appearances that make him human. It kind of creates a character without following him.
Yeah.
One of which is in this story where he kind of goes down onto the basement floor, which is Jasmine's ceiling technically, and he kind of sticks his nose in and pretends to be like a dog where he's like sniffing just to give her a little bit of laughter.
Right.
So it shows how stressful it may be, but how they're trying to turn it so it's not the most terrible experience that could possibly be.
Right. And Jujube also shows how she cares by giving her books, even though she can't really read it in the dark.
Right.
But the fact that Jujube knows that Jasmin might enjoy these things, she also shows she cares in that way.
Right. But the big story within Jasmine's story is Yuki. So Yuki is this girl that she's met when she was running around with Abel one day.
Right, doing errands.
Right. And Yuki kind of is following Jasmin and Abel for a little bit. And eventually it comes to a point where Jasmin is sleeping and Yuki pops up at the window. And this starts to form a relationship where Yuki sneaks out Jasmin and they just go and play games. They have fun. They do what little girls should be doing without the worry of an occupation or soldiers or things like that.
Right. And based on the story, Yuki seems to be an orphan because she's living with other girls who's supervised by one auntie.
Right. But it doesn't seem to be quite that. Because what we find out at the end is that Yuki actually seems to maybe be working, I don't know, it's not really a sex worker. It's because she's not getting paid. She's being abused for her body.
So it's like sex trafficking.
Right. And we see this through the innocent lens that is Jasmin, where Jasmin can't really put these two and two together.
Right.
So we see different viewpoints of how Yuki's body is abused, and these become hints till eventually Yuki takes Jasmin to that area. Because what Yuki wants to do is not put Jasmin's life in danger, which is kind of what I was scared of when Yuki was taking Jasmin. I was like,
exactly. It's like you're taking her to the danger zone.
I was like kind of wondering if she was doing what Brother Luke was doing in a way, like if they had told her if Yuki finds a new girl that she would be free or something.
Maybe.
But I don't think that's what it was. I think Yuki was genuinely trying to take Jasmin to her safe place, which is actually in a much more dangerous place than where Jasmin is currently.
Right.
And it's just this very sad thing we see happening to this young girl, but not only that, to a Japanese girl.
Right.
Because at this point, the occupation is mostly by Japan.
Right.
So I would have not thought that they would have abused their own civilians or their own citizens in that way. But very clearly Yuki is in a terrible spot for her own health.
Right, exactly.
So that leads us to what's kind of bound this whole storyline together, and that's Cecily.
Yes. She's not only a matriarch, but she's the homemaker.
Right.
And at the beginning, we see that Cecily is discontent with her life. She doesn't feel like she should be unhappy, but she is.
Right. Like to the point where she wants to throw tea at her husband's face.
Right. And to not take care of her children anymore.
Right. And this leads her to her next journey, which is eventually helping out General Fujiwara,
who goes by the name Bingley-chan
within British company.
Yes.
Yeah. This relationship seems a little weird it's a lot of the story of why Cecily is doing the things that she's doing, which is going behind Gordon's back, who's the person that she's spying on. So she's spying on her husband, who has not a military position, but something to do with Earth or...
Because Gordon started working with the port in the land portion at first, but as he started climbing up the ranks, he was working directly with like the transfers and the shipments.
And so Cecily is doing things like digging into trash. She is listening and spying through doors and just trying to get as much information for General Fujiwara, whose relationship with Cecily in a way has a romantic component. I wasn't sure if that was a part of the story.
So here's what I think. I think that Fujiwara knew that he could get into Cecily's good graces by his charm. And there's a part on page 70 that says, "The truth of it, she thought, was that men lose interest when the veil falls off and they learn the normalcy of a woman, that she urinates and bleeds and cries and snores like everyone else. But women grow fonder when a man feels within reach. Women do not worship gods. They yearn for broken toys they can mold and imprint on." And so I think Fujiwara knew this by showing his true self, by reintroducing himself as Fujiwara and showing his real name, showing the way he actually speaks without his British accent. He was disarming her so that he can use her to spy for him.
Right. So you don't think there's a genuine relationship going on between them two?
I don't think so. I think he knows that Cecily is attracted to him and using that attraction for his use.
I do think through her viewpoint, we can see that she still cares about the kids.
Yes.
I don't think she fully loves them and sacrifices for them. I think she is a maternal figure, but I don't think she is a mother like we saw in Pachinko, where she is willing to take her own life for the means of her children. What we see is that, like, when the Japanese soldiers would come into the house, Gordon would go and talk to them, and then we would see Cecily go hide into her room.
And Jujube is the one pushing Jasmin into the basement.
Exactly. And so what I think is going on, and what I've seen the most from these stories, is that Jujube is actually our strong character. She's the one holding the house together. She's the one taking care of her father, because Cecily definitely doesn't want to. So it makes me really sad to see such a broken relationship. We also know through Cecily's story that Gordon is struggling with his health, because he once had this position where he was working with the British, but once the Japanese occupation takes over, Gordon's now working in a metal factory. He's breathing in all these metals and fumes that are slowly harming his body. He's having more difficulty walking. Abel's now been gone for 6 months, so everyone's kind of emotionally breaking down, and Jujube has to be the one that's cleaning up, that's taking care of Gordon, that's organizing the house,
that's
taking care of Jasmin. Exactly, making sure she gets into the basement. But what we know of Cecily is that she's doing different things to help General Fujiwara, but she's now, in a way, seemingly abandoned her family. Not fully, she still takes care of them, but not with the same emotional intent that we see a character like Sunja do in Pachinko. So that's kind of where we leave off. Is we're in this space where we're still learning the characters. We now know where each character kind of sits. Each character has found themselves in some kind of trouble, which is Abel in the chicken coop, which is Jasmin in the wheelbarrow with her friend Yuki, which is Cecily at this dinner party and in this relationship with General Fujiwara. We know that Gordon's health is failing. The only person that doesn't seem to be in a massive amount of trouble is Jujube. So, within this read, what have you felt of it so far?
I felt that even though it was hard for me to get into at first because of the heaviness, once I got past the first chapter, I was able to roll through it pretty quickly.
I agree. But the other parts that I found difficult with this book, and it might just be me because I have more trouble reading certain books, I found that the amount of characters in the beginning of the story, because the way that it starts off is with Cecily's viewpoint, and we see all the characters all at once in like a matter of 2 pages, and that was just very overwhelming for me. But also, the story does the same thing where it jumps between timelines, and that always makes me a little bit more confused, just because I don't follow stories well like that.
That's fair.
So I think that might be more of a me thing. If you're good at that, or if you enjoy that, the story does start to flow really well.
Yes. I feel like the fact that the chapters are so long helped with the number of characters. Like, rather than confusing me, it made each character their own. It made me feel like I got to know each person's personality better, as well as the relationship. So even though there are many characters, I feel like I know them.
Absolutely. And I think that was the problem with the first chapter primarily, because once I started getting past the first chapter, and like you said, once we got each person's perspective, the characters started seeming much more real and not just people that were thrown at me. So I do feel like once I got past the first chapter, the characters were much more understandable, and I started getting actual visualizations of who they were.
Absolutely.
I definitely started getting into this book in terms of being able to flow right through it. After the first chapter, I think I pretty much read it straight on as much as I could, besides like life breaks that I needed to take. There is a strong sense of darkness within this.
Absolutely.
And this is just the first part, so I don't know how much darker it gets. I don't know if it's a book that eventually becomes lighter, which we really haven't seen from the other dark books that we read, like A Tiny Upward Shove or Pachinko. It kind of stays in a sense of darkness. There are positive things that happen, but it stays fairly grim. And I think that that's where this story is going to go.
Absolutely. I feel like the grimness is not going to stop.
Right. Things that I did really enjoy about this, though, is that the storytelling and the writing is actually exceptionally good.
Yes.
There is a very good flow to it. There is a sense of personality within each individual character. And if we read the very first part of this book, which is before the first chapter, we have the letter, which she writes to kind of describe where this book came from. This is just before the historical timelines and the maps.
Yeah.
Within that letter, what we find out is that one of the chapters is actually the blueprint for the entire book. And it was from a throwaway writing project. That's how Vanessa Chan describes it.
Right.
It was from a throwaway writing project that she had randomly done, and her facilitator told her to keep this story and keep it in mind. So this story was written in the pandemic, and that story that was written was actually chapter 4, which was Jujube's story.
Yeah.
And I thought that that story was probably the most well-written, and I could see why she wanted to create a much longer book and story from all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so if you liked a book like Pachinko, something that's historical fiction, something where you can get a sense of what people had to go through, I think you might also like this book. We're going to be going into our next 3 reads. And so hopefully we get through it without too much, feeling badness. But
I think we're just going to keep feeling bad.
Yeah, well, along that line, what's your predictions for the book?
I feel like Cecily is going to find herself in more trouble than she thought she would be. I feel like Jujube is going to continue carrying the family. I have a bad feeling that Jasmin is going to
get captured?
Get hurt somehow.
Like, do you think she's going to be in that same position that Yuki is?
I don't know if she's going to become in the same position specifically as Yuki, but I think she's going to get into trouble somehow. And I don't know how much darker Abel's story is going to be, but I think it's going to get even darker.
I think that Abel's story actually, he escapes and is able to get some retribution against the people that have affected him.
That's what I hope.
Right. Like you said, Jujube stays the character that is the strongest within all this and holds the family together. I also agree. I think Cecily is going to find herself in a lot of trouble because we know that the Japanese occupation turns over.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why Abel is in the position that he currently is in.
Right.
I'm also feeling like something bad happens to Jasmin, but I also feel like Gordon passes away. I feel like Gordon's story is only going to get sadder from the way that we see his health.
Yes.
And a lot of his relationships start to decline.
Right.
But who knows? I don't know. Make sure you find sources of happiness and sources of relief from these reads. I feel like we're in the same position that we were in with Pachinko. I think that was the last one we read where I was like, we need a book that provides relief. So our next read, it's Jamae's pick. So you can email or DM or do whatever to get into her head to find something that's more light. But if people did want to reach out to us, how can they do so?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can DM us while our DMs are still open at asianbookclubpod.
Yep, and we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com, where we have our bookstore that have books that we've read in the past, books that we recommend, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe.
Yep, other than that, make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye.